I don't think it's a problem to do with ecology. It's a problem to do with the word "and," which we imagine to be joining two things together, but in fact serves only to distance the things that we imagine it to be connecting. And this is the basic problem that I want to get at today. It's the problem of how we imagine religion to be religion, and how we imagine nature to be nature, and how we have come to imagine these things as different from each other. So if we think about how to imagine the kinds of environmental problems today, I think it's fairly safe to say that it's something to do with the system of global finance, trade, and economic exploitation that is, in some kind of ultimate way, unsustainable, and is going to lead to some drastic reordering of the way in which everything happens in the world. And the basis of this kind of unsustainability is enshrined in documents like the WTO that promote a certain kind of economic development and financial and trade arrangements, without at the same time taking into consideration whether or not this trade and finance and all of these things produces a kind of a sustainable form of living. And then we try to mitigate this on the other side by creating agreements like the kind of Kyoto, Paris, and so forth climate agreements that are derived from a kind of scientific understanding of the natural world that try and somehow mitigate the kinds of problems that we've created by this other set of global agreements concerning trade and finance and economic exploitation on the other hand. So we have this one thing going on over here, which is a system of creating a kind of an economic, financial trading culture. And then we have another thing over here, which is based on a kind of scientific understanding of nature. And the problem is we have this one thing going on over here and this other thing going on over there. How is it that we actually have arrived at this kind of this entire way of seeing global agreements? The underlying reason for this, I think, is fairly clear. It's something to do with an aspect of the ideology of modernity, or what Bruno Latour calls the modern constitution, in which we imagine nature to be this one thing over there, and we imagine economics and culture to be something else over there. And if we think that the underlying problem is something that is how we have imagined the world so that it produces these two kinds of separate realms, if we can't, then we have to somehow try and unthink the kind of framework that has produced these two different kinds of knowledge systems separately from each other. What I'm trying to say is we can't actually, from within this framework, put these two things together that have been produced separately. Actually, it's what we have to do is somehow undo the root framing of the way in which we have come to see the world and produce knowledge about the world that has produced these two kinds of separations. Following the quote attributed to Einstein, you can't solve problems with the same order of thinking that produce them. So from my view, what we are in the business of, at some level, in all of the things that we've been saying, is undoing that aspect of the ideology of modernity that produces the human world in one side over there, and produces nature as a kind of environment surrounding the human world, as a kind of neutral backdrop upon which human activity is projected. And we who work within the field of religious studies, I think one of the key problems that we're all dealing with is that the way in which we conceptualize religions and religious traditions and civilizations and cultures is itself the product of this framework of modernity. That is to say, the kinds of questions, the kinds of orienting questions and frameworks that we have that produce religion as a field to be studied is itself the product of this invention of this kind of modern constitution. So inasmuch as we produce religions to be studied and conceptualized and to be thought about in relation to nature and environment, we are living out the same fundamental frameworking of religion and nature that is part of the underlying problem. Modernity, as a cultural framework, produces a sense of human beings oriented fundamentally by time, right? That's what modernity basically means. Time which we imagine to progress in a kind of linear, non-repeatable and progressive ways. And this has been theorized, in the Chinese sociologist, social theorist says this, quote, conception of time as evolving, progressive and irreversible not only provides us with a way of reading history and reality, but also incorporates the entire meaning of our existence and struggles into a progression of time, a sequence of ages, and a set of future goals, end quote. And you see this very clearly in sinology, which is my own field, which is the basic orienting question has been to theorize China from the perspective of the past, to understand what China is like in terms of the key values and concepts derived from the classics. And this produces an idea of Chinese culture, and I'm sure this is the same in whatever field, or whatever religious field you're looking at, produces an understanding of China as something like a traditional culture, seasoned in certain kinds of values, a place of tradition, albeit one whose traditions were somehow interrupted by a modernity imported in part from the West. And this historical framework produces the basic orienting questions that we have about religion, such as how do traditional Chinese values continue to influence modern Chinese society? That's a kind of basic question that we ask. Or in what sense is China somehow a nation founded upon some kind of civilizational tradition encoded in Chinese characters? Just the other day I came across an advertisement for a volume of recently translated into English of one of the preeminent sinologists today, Yu Yingshi, living in Taiwan. And I'm just quoting from the blurb from this thing. It says he's the recipient of the Kluge Prize for Lifetime Achievement in the Humanities, the Tang Prize for Revolutionary Research in Sinology, and these works have been translated into English, spanning 2,000 years of social, intellectual, and political change. The essays in these volumes investigate two central questions through all aspects of Chinese life. What core values sustained this ancient civilization through centuries of upheaval? And in what way did these values survive in modern times? This is the kind of and he is one of the most brilliant scholars of anything anywhere. But my basic question here is, how is it that he has come to see the problems of China as being defined by this kind of orienting framework? And that is because he, like all of us, produce our understandings of nations and civilizations and traditions from this kind of orienting framework of modernity. At the same time, modernity produces nature, or the environment, as a kind of backdrop onto which these cultural and historical questions are projected. So from my point of view, I think that we have to somehow disconnect ourselves or think ourselves out of this mindset of nature over here and culture over there, religion over here, technology over there, and reinscribe cultural, religious and economic flourishing into the flourishing of the natural world. This means to somehow to think outside of tradition and modernity as the basic orienting frames for what we do. Now, Prasenjit Dwara, in his recent book, said that he takes as his starting place this basic orienting question that modernity was this tradition produced in the West, and it has produced a kind of overreach by man of nature, right? And so the reason for investigating traditions outside of the West is to look precisely at those traditions and civilizations that did not produce the same kind of order of questions and problems that were produced in the West. And I think this has led to a great interest in examining, for instance, Asian traditions as, how do they conceptualize the world? Maybe we can learn something from this that doesn't produce the same kinds of problems that we have produced from the evil Christianity and Lynn White and all of that, and all of that kind of stuff. In fact, that is to say, we get out of this problem of modernity by somehow looking to the past and to the East as somehow the opposite of this. I want to do something different. That is to say, to propose that our operating framework for thinking about nature and culture should not come from the past or some imagined Asian past, right, but from the perspective of the future, from an era that doesn't yet exist, from an era which we hope will do. That is to say, ecological sustainability and flourishing is the very overcoming of a paradigm of modernity by a new kind of paradigm, one from the future, not from the past, a paradigm driven by some kind of unimagined hope for the existence of a future world. The consequence of this is to change the way we think about religion, to produce religion, that is, as scholars, to produce religion from the perspective of some imagined or hoped for future sustainability, is to produce a radical transformation in how to think about religion in its fundamental relation to the category of modernity. Gone are these basic orienting questions of tradition or innovation. Gone are the fundamental questions of the relationship of the religion to the state, which is, of course, the preeminent political ordering produced by modernity. I think both of these kinds of questions should be transcended by a kind of larger orienting question of the capacity of cultural frames to produce sustainable modes of living. Questions of ecology and economy, not history and tradition, come to the fore in thinking about religion and culture. This question of the relationship of cultural traditions to that of sustainability isn't one that is really immediately obvious within the logic of modernity, and isn't one that traditional scholarship has been so organized as to produce. So I'm thinking about how do we produce religion, or produce a vision of religion, produce an orienting set of questions about religion from some future perspective of sustainability. And this in part involves imagining how scholars from the future will rewrite the discourse of religious studies from the vantage point of a culture of sustainability that does not actually exist at the present, and to imagine how cultures and religions will be produced, not from a perspective of a dichotomy between tradition and modernity, but from some new kind of framework grounded in some kind of idea of sustainability or flourishing. Where is this problem produced that what I want to say is, the problem is us. That is to say, we who are scholars of religion, or scholars of ecology, or scholars who try and put together these two frames. That is to say, as scholars who work in departments of religion, or departments of environmental studies, or these kinds of things, we are the ones who give the social value to these disciplinary modes of knowledge that inspire people to come and register in our courses, and we pat them on the back. Great, you got an A in religious studies today. And what all of this is doing is validating the disciplinary production of knowledge grounded in this modern idea of the university that emanated largely from Europe in the 19th century, that is at the root part of the problem that means that we have to have this "and" word joining this religion word and this ecology together. So I think that if religion and ecology is to have a future, the future must involve dissolving this "and" word, right? Which means dissolving somehow this the kind of social structuring of knowledge that happens in this kind of disciplinary traditions in universities. And I think in some way, all of us, in all of the things that we do, we are actually doing this already. And we are all involved in some kind of interdisciplinary way, or undisciplining, as I call it, undisciplining way of doing this. But the problem is we live within these social structures of the university that put us in these departments, and we've been interdisciplinary. So we invite somebody from a social scientist or a scientist to come and talk to us. And what I would like to call on all of us to do, especially as we become more advanced in our academic world, is to somehow be involved in the process of undisciplining the university itself as the place that creates the kind of knowledge in these kinds of boxes that we're always trying to put back together. Thank you very much.
Great. So now we have